cheating on reality. Limitation is too. Anyway, when you cheat on reality, bad things are gonna happen. When you cheat on reality, ooh, baby, when you cheat on reality, bad things gonna happen, you know that. Scheiße. Bad thing. Monitor. Oh my god. A failure. Tungsten catastrophe Langston. Alteration is Dajavdia. Kilimanjaro Mountains and Tuntushina. Alteration is Dajavdia. This is gonna be fun. Oh, let it be fun. Nobody gives a fuck anymore. Literally, nobody gives a fuck anymore. More. Let's go to places together. I don't know, man.
Your voice is funny.
You don't like your own voice, do you? Well, I have a fix for you. We got one watching. Hello, viewer. How are you? We got one watching. Hello, viewer. How are you? Please come back. Who's on you, Mark? We got one watching. Hello, viewer. How are you? Please come back. I'm sorry. Who's on you, Mark? We got one watching. Hello, viewer. How are you? No, it's not fun. expected. I mean, 4 followers. I'm not gonna be a fifth one. That, not stupid. I'm a journalist. I have no morals. Not even God. I have no morals. What is bad?
Hello, Matt.
I can bring you a box of chocolates.
That's great.
Several days later.
Who are you?
Matt from the BBC.
Alright, I'm gonna let you know.
Good morning. A very important interview today with a very renowned, esteemed, well-known journalist. I think you can see him standing outside my house right there. There he is. Please, can I have another interview? Please. And it's a shame the BBC with their big budgets made you fly economy with it. It must be very annoying for you to fly in and out for no reason. Feel sorry for you, man.
Yeah, it's a struggle. It's a struggle out here.
You'll survive.
It starts with the most popular.
Capitalized on it. Cadian, the captain, capable in the clutch, delivers the first. Tesserato going around the world and back again. And try put some distance between himself and this orb, but this leaves the site with no one in it. Cadian doesn't know it, but right now he could have even stuck that bomb. Tap does not bait a peek, and so second by second, Cadian knows he can't do this. Surely, one man left standing, safes him behind him. Cadian reads and leads by example. He rises to his feet. He knows what he's just done. The big bad villain in Brazil finds another round for heroic and destroys the hopes and dreams of Furia. Capitalized on it. Cadian, the captain, capable in the clutch, delivers the first.
Sick. Guys, so we've been offered chai tea. Offered chai tea. Here. Oh, assalamu alaikum. Okay, assalamu alaikum. Oh, hello. Hello, assalamu alaikum. Hello, my friend. Oh, wow. What up? Assalamu alaikum. Hello, assalamu alaikum. How are you? Wow, this is cool. So we're gonna get some chai tea. Enjoy. Okay. Oh, nice to hear. Okay.
Kirk, you're laying in bed, and you heard that
Correct.
kind of riff, and I know Lars then said to you, "Wanna?"
Let me get.
Magisk is here. This round is not over yet. This round is not safe yet. Magisk with the trigger discipline. Oh my goodness. He's trying to take it all away. And with that kill there, Magisk the Marauder might have done it. Robs them of the bomb. Even though he goes down, time is the enemy. Time is the problem. He's got to hide. They've got to get past Spinks, who just waits. One kill in the right place. Oh! He slowed the bomb down. Oh, 1 second, but Napa's got it!
Under the van! He shot him in his feet! 20 health! 1 bullet, it's all it took! And Naf finds the kill with...
Retreat, but the adversary is using both air and heavy artillery systems. The defenders of this borderline saw in South Donetsk Leopard tanks. It was the first time, and there is evidence from the people on the front line. So the Ukrainian army is using German tanks which were supplied to Ukraine from Europe. So far, we don't see many of them, just some spots. But the dialogue which happened in November concerning the Leopard, now it's June, and we already witnessed Leopard in operation on the borderline. So it's not the speed what the Ukrainians were expected to get these heavy systems, but it is in war, conflict against Russian group. The situation is not very easy. I am constantly getting information from Shebekin at Belgorod region and from different spots on the borderline and on the front line in Kherson region, in South Donetsk region, in Makiivka, in Donetsk region. There is still shelling going on. So we're following the situation, Scott.
No, it's war is the people speak of the fog of war. We hear that in everybody, and especially early on in something. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of in some cases concern, even fear about what's transpiring. But I think we can agree that, as you indicated, the initial discussions about the Leopard began last October, November, and they're just now appearing on the battlefield. So I think we can agree that none of this has taken the Russian government or the Russian military by surprise, that this is something that has been anticipated. And while the Ukrainians can achieve localized surprise, localized success, that strategically, Russia should be in a position to absorb the Ukrainian blows and retain its a superior military posture on the battlefield. Do you share my optimism, or do you have reason to believe otherwise?
I do believe that right now the Ukrainian forces need to demonstrate not only the determination or military success, but they need to report to Washington, to the Brussels, to London for the billion of US dollars and euros spent, not on the economy of the Ukraine, but in military machine of Ukraine. Of course, people in the street got nothing. They got armory, weapons, and the weapons which is used not only against the adversary and the peaceful civilians of the Ukrainians, just citizens, are the hostage of the Ukrainian regime, which allow the West countries to pump this area with the weapons and to give all the support, the political support to those activities that Ukraine is conducting against Russian borders. I would like to reiterate that according to the Russian doctrine, when our sovereign territory is attacked, Russia has a right to use all the military capabilities possible, including the strategic nuclear weapons. Ukraine is acting on a thin line, and there is a propaganda that the Russian Liberation Army is penetrating the Russian territory, and we see even the mercenaries from Poland, from the Europe, and Ukrainian reserve troops, which are deployed there, and they are shelling, and they take their hit squads inside the Russian territory. But in foreign policy, and what we see in the West mass media, they are talking about kind of guerrilla liberation army or movement. It's nonsense. It's a very dangerous play. Those people who take control of that are walking on a thin line, on a thin ice, because, you know, if there is a big attack on Russian territory, there's going to be all the military means necessary. Probably that's what the Washington needs, because Europe doesn't need it at all. If there is a stake on a long-term campaign to defeat Russia, I can understand that, but I don't understand why these European countries need that. If there is a nuclear cloud, it's going to move towards Europe, and this territory cannot support life. So why is this escalation happening? It's one thing when Russia is liberating 4 regions in Donbass, you know, included in the Russian territory, and there is a military conflict, but there is a territory of Russia which has always been the Russian territory, even before the collapse of the USSR, even during the Tsar, the monarchy time of Russian Empire, that was sovereign part of Russia. And now, what it can end up in a big campaign against Ukraine, or these decision-making centers attack from Russia, or a serious escalation at the level of the against the collective West, or what is going to happen? I believe that the parties supporting this attack against Belgorod region are there, you know, playing with fire. You know, it's a very dangerous case. So we need to differentiate between the military action on Donbass region and attempts to shell Russian territory using foreign mercenaries and foreign arms. What do Poles have to do with the Belgorod region? What do they have that? But they have their broadcast, this Polish broadcast, and they demonstrate direct involvement in the military conflict against Russian citizens, as they killed and injured, wounded people of Belgorod rural areas have nothing to do with the war conflict in Ukraine. It's a very dangerous case. We need to get back to our sense. European leaders need to get back to their sense, to remember the Ukrainian regime, to read the doctrine of Russian security. All the threats and risks are stipulated quite clearly. You know, the Europe and America providing all the capabilities, fuel, material support of the Ukrainian army. So we will have to bomb and attack this borderline of Ukraine and Europe if the escalation doesn't stop.
Well, this is I mean, you bring up an interesting point. To what end is this conflict being waged? If you listen to Victoria Nuland, if you listen to Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan, and even people like Borrell and van der Leyen in Europe, it appears that this Ukrainian counteroffensive is designed to break the spirit of Russia, to drive Russia to accept a negotiated conclusion to this conflict that is to the advantage of Ukraine. So the idea is that they're putting all of their eggs in one basket, so to speak, this counteroffensive, the attack against Belgrade. It's not just to shape the battlefield militarily, but to shape it politically, to achieve a political result in Russia, to break the spirit of the Russian people and bring down the Russian government. Does this have any chance of success? Do you perceive any weakness on the part of Russia where, Ukrainian counteroffensive can compel Russia to agree to a negotiation of this conflict in ways that would require Russia, for instance, to give up Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia? Or is this just wishful thinking on the part of the Ukrainians and their Western supporters?
You know, on the other side of the front line, there is a legend, there is a myth, which is connected with the World War I, 1917, when the historical event, the Russian army reversed and went back to remove the authorities which had sent that, and there was a revolution, there was a civil war. So the war was a kind of a catalyst of the coup d'etat and regime change in 1917. Of course, that's what the Ukrainians, the leaders in Ukraine want, and the decision-making centers of the West, collective West, want, you know, for such. It's not quite clear. There needs to be a panic, forcing people to go outside and to effect a coup d'etat. But it will not be the case. You have visited Russia, and you have seen the patriotic society of Russia. Of course, we do have our own people oriented at the West. You know, from 1 to 2 million people have left Russia after the beginning of the special military operation. But you know, Russia hasn't diminished, it hasn't weakened. You know, from a perspective in our society, it's much cleaner. There is a kind of collective determination to win. And our victory is not over anything. The victory of Russia is to give an opportunity to the Russian-speaking people to live in their homeland and in good interaction with their neighbors. You know, to be honest, I do remember 1990s, and I don't understand how European leaders could agree to be a weapon in the hands of the Washington. Let's be honest, they are not sovereign in their political decisions, and they transferred the agenda to the hands of the elite, which can be seen right now in the White House in Washington. I don't understand the interest of Washington, since Washington is a hegemon state and it wants to still dominate the world, and even Europe can be regarded as adversary in the economic field. So the war in Ukraine allows, you know, kneading down the European competitors and to bring great benefit from that. At the same time, the European leaders themselves need to explain to Washington that they have the right to say a word, and that we have to live with this crazy neighbor, a country full of weapons, a big outflow of people from Ukraine. There is a big criminalization in Ukraine. There is no rule of law. It is absolutely corrupted state where the rule of law doesn't operate, where absolutely different internal forces are in action, both by Zelensky and other internal actors. Ukraine is governed by oligarchs, the capitalists, who govern the internal political situation quite manually. And I would like to reiterate that in 9 months, in 2024, the election is going to happen, the presidential election is going to happen. No, it's not going to be the case. They're not going to cancel the election. Washington will not allow Zelensky not to conduct the presidential election. Now we are going to have a new stage of pumping the Ukrainian with political models and different statements. We will see a big clash between the domestic political groups. You know, I believe that even until the election, Zelensky cannot be the president anymore. You know, it might be the way of how to hide Zelensky from retribution. So he can take his post till March, and then he will go to London and to the United States whenever he's accepted, actually. You know, from my perspective, you cannot rule it out, because this election campaign is going to determine the balance of powers, and the strive for the victory by particular clans in Ukraine will put a strain and pressure on the governing elite of Zelensky.
No, that's a very interesting point, because people talk about what is Russia's end game? What is Russia? What is this? What defines victory for Russia? And you've said victory is the defense of the Russian-speaking people. Vladimir Putin, when he spoke a few months ago, he didn't speak about a Russian offensive to capture Odessa. He didn't speak about a Russian offensive to capture Kharkov or to threaten Kiev. He spoke about creating the conditions for the economic and social well-being of the Russians that are in the territories that have been absorbed by Russia. So that appears to be the goal. There's a lot of people who say that this war can't end until Russia captures Odessa. But I don't hear the Russian government saying that. And what you've said is something very interesting, that, because we speak of also the Russian government has spoken of denazification as a goal, how to get rid of the Zelensky regime. Is a Russian goal to create the conditions for democratic change in Ukraine, that Ukraine would cleanse itself through a political process that would delegitimize Zelensky and put in place somebody who would be willing to live peacefully with Russia? Is this something that the Russian government is looking to? You're the first person I've heard who's in a position of authority and knowledge to bring up the March election as a critical event. Is this something that the West should be looking at, that this is a decision point, that the March election could be a key event that allows the transition of Ukraine away from war towards peace?
Yes, because the Ukrainian case is becoming very important and determining from the prospect for the election in the US. Next year, we are going to see the election in the United States. So there are going to be a lot of questions about Ukraine to Biden, and quite severe questions if he runs for the president from the Democrats. Secondly, money. It's all about money, about the billion of pumping into Ukraine. It is a big headache not only in the West. It's a big headache for just regular citizens. I'm constantly reading European and American social networks on different political chats, and I see a very interesting trend. A year ago, around 80-90% of the users of the social network supported these financial aids, and it was clear where the money was invested in. It was not about the social support that was pumped into the military machine, war machine, but over the recent months, I've been witnessing an absolutely different picture. So the shift to the situation where people keep on asking, and the money spent on the weapons, can they bring to any peace? So as the weapons brought to this territory, how can it bring peace? It's absolutely nonsense. So you need to relieve the territory from the weapons, and maybe to give control over this state under the international platform. I'd like to reiterate the president's, Mr. Putin's statement during the first months of the operation. Russia is not going to occupy Ukraine. That's not the end goal. That's not the end game for Russia. And Russia has enough resources. We have a big and rich country. We have a lot of commodities, so we can live autonomously without attacking any other state. In November 2021, Putin explained in detail to NATO partners, please bring out your weapons from Ukraine. Stop pumping the European countries with the nuclear weapons. That would bring to no peace. And all the talks that the US nuclear weapons in Europe against the Islamic fundamentalism, it's fairy tale. Stop it. Cut this stuff. So why do we need to have this confrontation between the biggest nuclear powers like it was in before 1991 in Germany? So does the world need that another time? Do we need another Cuban crisis? Will the planet survive through this Cuban crisis? 60 years ago in Washington and in Moscow, there were smart people who could avoid this nuclear disaster. But right now, this situation is different, and the nuclear hegemony is not the factor of dominance on our planet. We see that the nuclear weapons are not the main thing in hands. We see other states developing without nuclear weapons, creating quite stable economies. And together with our colleagues from the United States, we need to think that the nuclear weapon is, of course, as deterrence weapons. But we need to think ahead about the new treaty, new START treaties, about new agreements and treaties that would provide for the stability and kind of a certainty about the future, because right now it's not the case, absolutely not the case. I believe that in the US and in Europe, it's not the best domestic political environment. I see that from the social networks. I see that people are worried about their families, about their homes, about their future, and the war is not a pleasant thing to everyone. I don't know the people who would give a round of applause to the war. Maybe, of course, there are some psychos who can support this bloody war, but we do not do that. Even today's words of the Kremlin, of Mr. Peskov, that Moscow and Putin are always ready for peaceful negotiations if they are supported by the West. But the West doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to cease it, although particularly European leaders are trying to do that, but they are kept shut by Mr. Blinken, who comes to Europe on a regular basis and is doing that. He just tries to put all these possible initiatives to stop any initiative to agree on with Russia, like in 2015 in Minsk Agreement. If the Minsk Agreement had been fulfilled, life in Ukraine would be different today. The people would live peacefully, they would develop further on. Donbass would be an autonomous region of Ukraine, and it would live its own life. But we have seen what has happened. Unfortunately for Ukraine, the West pumped billions of US dollars and is going to support this project, the project of defeat and destabilize situation in Russia. Therefore, Russia will be compelled to do what it has to do, to conduct war against the representatives of the Kiev regime. But what we are to see in the future. So let's believe that in the planet we have smart people. I'd like to reiterate that Mr. Xi offered the Chinese platform for negotiations and to provide for the peace in Ukraine. Possibly such big actors will achieve result, since it seems to me that America and in Europe, everybody is tired of the war. But even, and you know, there is a collective saturation of these bad news, and they want to see some kind of positive news from the Eurasian continent.
You bring up again. You started this conversation with bringing up strategic weapons, and you've just discussed it again. So let's go down this path for a second. You know, the United States has just suspended critical aspects of the New START Treaty, data sharing about the deployment of American strategic systems, etc. Both Russia and the United States are in a state of suspension. They both have committed to maintaining the numbers that are associated with the New START Treaty, but this treaty expires in 2026, and both Russia and the United States are involved in a period of modernization of their respective strategic forces. Nuclear missiles are still being built by Russia and deployed by Russia, and America is developing and producing its own new generation of strategic weapons. And if this treaty dies, and right now there's no talk about a new treaty, there's no discussion, there's no negotiation. So if this treaty dies, there's nothing left to keep these numbers down, and there's a potential for a new arms race, which could lead to not just a new Cuban Missile Crisis, but to Armageddon. The roadblock that appears to exist is the American policy of achieving the strategic defeat of Russia in Ukraine. The Russian government has said that it cannot engage in any dialogue about strategic weapons so long as the United States is pursuing the strategic defeat of Russia. And the United States has not changed its decision. So in simple terms, the only way to get arms control back on the agenda appears for Russia to win the war in Ukraine decisively. Is Russia prepared to win the war in Ukraine decisively in order to change the strategic dynamic so that arms control could once again be something that can be talked to? Or would a Russian victory in Ukraine forever prevent this kind of discussion about arms control? Are we really it seems to me we're in a very, very dangerous situation where We need sane individuals, responsible individuals who consider the consequences of every action. And as irresponsible as the United States has been, unfortunately, the burden is on Russia. How Russia responds, how Russia proceeds is the key to a peaceful resolution of this problem. Russia appears to need to win a war, but not win it so decisively as to threaten the United States into continuing to pursue nuclear disarmament. Does this make any sense to you?
In 2010, the New START Treaty was signed by Medvedev and Barack Obama, and from that time on, within the second decade, there were 300 events when the inspectors from the United States arrived in Russia, and the Russian specialists arrived in the United States and controlled the number of deployed military warheads on the strategic delivery systems. After that, after the pandemic time, within 2 or 3 years, these mutual visits were stopped, were frozen. But by the time the situation, the geopolitical situation was quite difficult, I would like to remind you that from 2021, in Washington and Brussels started supporting lethal weapons into Ukraine. At that time, from spring 2021, there were anti-tank missile systems, different mobile missile system, light infantry vehicles, and it was clear that the pumping of the military weapons would lead to something, would lead to war. And all the talks that there was support for the defensive operations aimed only at the defense of Ukraine. It was clear even in Russia that the West was going for a big war campaign. Nobody would provide weapons in such volumes. I really doubt that in Europe and in America there are some philanthropists who were ready to spend billions of dollars for the support of Ukraine, which, to be honest, after the collapse of USSR, in America nobody even remembered for 20 years before the Ukrainian case happened. We kept monitoring the mass media, streamlined mass media in the United States. And Ukraine appeared only on the agenda in 2014 after coup d'etat. There was a McCain, there were Nuland, and a number of other political figures from the United States, and they claimed direct political support for coup d'etat. And after supporting coup d'etat, I'd like to remind you that more than 100 people were killed during this coup d'etat on Maidan. The West didn't want to find those to blame for this Odessa bloodshed, and they only supported that. And it was clear that this strategic weapon system would turn into the dimension, a different dimension. I'd like to remind you that the Americans are imposing us the involvement of China in New START Treaty. They tell us, so go and agree on with China, bring them to the negotiating table, and we 3 countries should sign the document. The Beijing said that let Russia and the United States reduce the number of their military nuclear warheads to the amount we have, and then we can talk, because America and Russia has thousands of nuclear warheads and they have only hundreds, so we have different digits even. This new treaty with the United States is necessary. It is vital both to Russia and the USA. I believe that Washington perceives war as a local conflict, and it compares with the war in Afghanistan, when the United States, together with the allies, supported through Pakistan the delivery of weapons, and then they provided billions of US dollars to the accounts of those groups waging war against the Soviet Union, and they hope for the same result. So we would spend several years in this war, and after that we would take our things and get back to Russia. But the point is that Washington forgets about one thing. Ukrainian territory is a Russian territory. Historically, it's Russian territory. And in 1991, pro-West alcoholics called sovereign territory of Ukraine. It doesn't make this non-Russian territory. You know, whatever political narratives can be created. You know, my parents from Donbass, my grandparents are from Donbass, originally from Donetsk, Mariupol. They are from there. Why am I living in Russia? Shouldn't consider this as my homeland, as a Russian land. You know, it's a big propaganda campaign of deceiving the Western audience, Western people, because people in Europe and people in America believe that Ukrainian is a sovereign, independent state. But try to find any coins before 1991. There was not a state before USSR, during the Russian Empire time, before 1917. Right now, Russia is recovering its territories. You know, apart from Georgia and Ukraine, which were actually one of the richest states within the USSR, they were provided with all the money, and of course the Baltic states. Baltic state was a kind of exhibition of the USSR. Those states you know, put a lot of pressure and say a lot of dirty things about the USSR. But for 70 years, the USSR was working for these areas, provided different infrastructure plans, and defeated those territories against externalities, invested a lot of money in these territories. And right now, after 70 years of the investment, we've been hearing that we are enemies, we're adversaries, we occupied them during USSR time, we didn't do anything in these areas. You know, I visited Estonia not long ago, and I was surprised when I saw a lot of drunksters outside, a lot of drinking people outside, not many people. I talked to the Estonians, and I heard only reprimands against the European Union. So we're the backyard of Europe, nobody wants to see us in Europe because we are from the post-Soviet camp. And I asked them a question: what was the point of getting this sovereignty and getting under the auspices of the European Union? You know, they were honest and said that when we were young in Soviet Union, we lived better rather than the backyard and the low in developing economy of the European Union.
No, I mean, thank you for that insight. Let's get back for a second to strategic weapons. Right now, we see a situation where Belarus is in the process of receiving nuclear weapons from Russia, and aspects of the Belarusian military, specifically aircraft and tactical missiles, Iskander-M, I believe, have been trained and are prepared to use these weapons in a potential nuclear conflict. President Lukashenko has spoken of a process where he is reactivating military bases that used to be affiliated with the SS-25, the Topol missile, so that if Russia wanted to, they could deploy strategic nuclear assets to Belarus, the YARS system, in modern mobile missiles like this. This appears to be an extraordinarily dangerous situation. Some people would say provocative, but I think we have to also compare and contrast the fact that the United States continues to retain 100 nuclear weapons in Europe that are allocated to NATO allies, the B-61 bombs, that two NATO nations, France and the United Kingdom, possess independent nuclear forces that aren't included in any arms control agreement. Would it be safe to say that what Russia is doing is creating a more sophisticated negotiating platform for a future disarmament treaty that would see the elimination of all nuclear weapons in Europe? Or is this part of a new Russian reality where nuclear muscle flexing is going to be part and parcel of Russia's geopolitical posturing.
You know, for the United States, who deploy their tactical nuclear weapons in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in the territory of Italy, you were right to say that France and Great Britain have their own independent nuclear weapons, but tactical nuclear weapons are in Europe. Right now, being there, it poses a threat only to Russia, because the bombarding jets can get airborne and attack Russia within 0 minutes. B-62-12 are modernized nuclear warheads. They are controlled, difficult to intersect, and they can have the nuclear warheads up to 40 kilotons. We do understand that 40 kilotons is enough to destroy even Moscow, one warhead like that, if the war conflict should start. So we do understand that deployment of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus is kind of a response to unwillingness of the United States to remove the tactical weapons in Europe. I would like to ask a question to the Belgians, to the Netherlands, to the Dutch, to the Italians. And are you ready for your state to become a target for the strategic nuclear weapons of Russia? Why do Netherlands need these nuclear weapons of the Americans? Why do Germans need these American nuclear weapons? You know, the Germans lost 2 world wars. Why are they possessing these nuclear weapons? I do believe that these countries do not want to possess American nuclear weapons, but the United States impose, you know, this kind of false benefit to them. You know, they say to their allies, you need to do that. And I would like to reiterate that Belarus will not be responsible for taking control over these nuclear weapons. Russia has reiterated that the whole control and the possible use of nuclear weapons will only happen at the discretion of Moscow. The Belarus is kind of finding these countermeasures against Poland, against the Baltic states, against Ukrainian, who have said about the possible conflict with Belarus. Since Belarus is a direct ally of Russia, it's a part of our unified alliance or unified state of Russia and Belarus. So in Belarus we have a joint army. It's up to 10,000 of Russian troops over there. So Belarus, 98% of the Belarus weapons are Russian-made, even though Belarus produces some types of the weapons. But Russian weapons are dominating this market, taking into account that more than 90% of the economy is using the Russian markets. So we are intertwined like the twins. So in those goals which Russia is achieving in Ukraine right now, since Ukrainian territory is the third brother people, Ukrainians, the Belarusians, and the Ukrainians, and those Russian-speaking Ukrainians whom we consider to be quite normal people, not imposed by propaganda and Russian phobia. So they can become the third ally of Russia and Belarus. It will happen. I'm not sure what kind of borders we will see in 5-6 years' time, but the Russians, Belarusians and Ukrainians, representative of the key ethnic populations of the Slavonic populations, will live in peace in a good neighborhood and will become a big part of one big Russia, which we want to see in Russia more than anyone. We need to bring together our forces. We need to protect our people who are very close to us, either culturally or in our language, in our lifestyle, and we need to develop good relations with our neighbors. You know, just before 2014, before the collective West masterpiced this coup d'etat in Ukraine, everything was quite good. I visited Ukraine on annual basis. I visited the Crimea. I didn't see any Russophobic attitude, but right now Ukraine is an absolutely different state. Belarus, thanks to the God, managed to go through that. In 2020, the situation was quite dangerous, but Lukashenko showed more determination compared with Mr. Yanukovych in the past, and he demonstrated to these pro-Western political groups that he had his backbone, he had the shoulders to support him, he had a big support in Belarus, and he was the leader of the majority, not the minority. At that same time, Belarus on the 1st of July becomes an independent player which cannot be attacked. Belarus will have tactical weapons. On the other hand, it is, in fact, as a kind of a stronghold of Russia in the West, since right now Belarus is a part of our missile shield, some anti-missile system, ABM from Torrent 2 system, S-400 systems. So right now, Belarus, from the perspective of MBA and from anti-missile systems, probably the most secure state after Russia in this region. So the attempts to portray Belarus as a kind of collective adversary to the West is still in place. We see that right now some problems on the European and Belarusian borderline connected with the transit of trucks, and there is a political fight with the Baltic states. The Baltic states are just weapons in the Brussels and the Washington states. These are very dwarf states, but they are located there and they create some obstacles to the trade ties, because the European consumers are those who lose, because these trucks are moving towards Europe and European consumers do not get these goods. You know, it's a big knot of problems, not only in Ukraine. Since all the states are interconnected economically, Belarus, in this case, is kind of a very important ally. I have visited Belarus 3 times over this month, attended different events. I can tell you for sure that Belarus impresses me a lot. The people in Belarus support the policy of Russia and they want to be integrated. I believe that this vaccine of 2020, the people saw what had happened in Ukraine. They understood, they learned the lesson, and they understood that Russia is a kind of a guarantor of stability and security. Unfortunately, the collective West is not interested in Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, or any other post-Soviet states live in peace. They're not interested in that. They are only interested in escalation, for the Russia to wage war and spend billions of rubles on these weapons to participate in this armed force. We are constantly engaged in these processes, but without the action Russia is taking in Ukraine right now, it is undoubtedly that we can achieve the goals of security and peace in this territory. Sometimes to achieve peace, you need to conduct military operations. How sad it might sound, it is just a matter of fact, and it's not Russia to blame. Russia supported peace in this area for 25 years after the collapse of the USSR. And the AC test, which was the protest and coup d'etat orchestrated by the West in 2014, which ended up in a bloody coup d'etat, that was the cause of that civil war and the chaos which we can see right now in Ukraine.
Well, I want to thank you very much for the sobering analysis. You've helped take the audience on a tour de force of the complexity of and the danger of the situation we face today. There's a lot of questions. There's answers that need to be discerned, but I thank you for this conversation, Alexander Mikhailov, for coming on and helping us get a better understanding of just how dangerous and how complex the situation is today in Ukraine, in Europe, and indeed between Russia and the United States with strategic nuclear weapons. You know, this kind of dialogue is absolutely necessary. It's not taking place anywhere else, and I hope those of you who have joined us today appreciate the fact that you're getting a unique opportunity to hear information, to hear analysis that otherwise wouldn't be there. And there's an old saying that you can't solve a problem unless you first accurately define it. And one of the things that we did today with Alexander is define the problem in a more concerted fashion, in a more accurate fashion, so that proper solutions can be achieved. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to everybody next week.
too.
Magnificence never ends.
But I don't think Tim Cook can. All right, I completely changed my opinion. Erase everything you just heard. My new opinion is Steve Jobs would not have created mixed reality headsets. What do you think? Do you think Steve Jobs would have even tried? Or would he have said, no, you don't want that on your head. Get that off your head. I don't know. Oh, actually, the Apple earbuds or whatever they are, the Apple AirBuds came under Tim Cook, and those are amazing. So that's a pretty good technology. By the way, do your earbuds make your ears itch? Does anybody have an itchy ear problem? I can't even use them. I can only use the earbuds for maybe one day in a row. If I use them for 2 days in a row, my ears will itch like insanely. I can't even use them. There's a reason for that. I saw a study that there's some kind of vibrational thing that happens there. No, it's not about washing them. It's about the vibration. Not about washing them. You can say it a million times, but it's not about washing them. It's just about the sound. All right, Jack Dorsey has endorsed RFK Jr. I don't know if that'll make any difference, but he seems to think that RFK Jr. could beat both of them. Jack Dorsey also tweeted, cryptically, end of an empire. We don't know what empire he's talking about. I'm guessing America. What do you think? I think he's saying it's the end of the American empire. I don't know. Could be. Maybe he's talking about Twitter. But probably America. Well, there's a study out. I saw Ashley St. Clair was tweeting about this. It shows that 53% of mothers of boys with gender identity disorder have borderline personality disorder or depression. These mothers also had child-rearing attitudes and practices that encourage symbiosis and discourage the development of autonomy. Are you surprised that 53% of boys who had gender identity disorder had a crazy mom? But crazy in a specific way. All right, but that would still leave about half, roughly half of the kids who are not influenced by the mother. What do you think influences the other half? They're born that way, and then they're just, expressing who they are? Probably for some. Probably some are just born that way, and they're expressing who they are. But we might look for some other studies that says left-wing activists also have mental illness. A study out of the University of Bern in Switzerland has revealed that those who partake in far-left activism are more likely to exhibit narcissistic personality and psychopathic tendencies. All right, so you got your mothers, half of the mothers of boys with gender identity disorder have mental illness. Many of the left-wing activists have mental illness. Is there any other mental illness in the news? Oh, yes, there is. So there are over 2,000 families who are suing social media for making their children mentally ill. Right. So now we know that 3 things associated with mental illness: mothers of boys with gender identity disorder, left-wing activists, and anybody who watches social media, who's a child anyway. So are we finally at the point where we can say that politics is rarely about politics? It's almost entirely about mental illness, isn't it? It's almost entirely mental illness. Because the stuff we talk about is the stuff that's interesting. What is interesting? Well, what's interesting is, when some far right or far left group does something. Because everybody in the middle is busy being boring. That's what makes us average. We're all boring in the middle. But the 2 extremes cause all the news. They're the ones that drive the news. And it's all mental illness. It's mental illness. The trans debate is mostly mental illness, but there's a core of real people who have real issues, and I wish them the best and hope they can get all the support they need, and I hope they don't get discriminated and all that. But it looks like it's mostly mental illness, mostly. So it's some form of mass hysteria, persuasion, parental effect. But I don't want to take away from the fact that there are real people, I think, as far as I know, there are real people with gender dysphoria. And they should not be thrown under the bus just because other people are a different situation. So I want to show some empathy there, but it's clearly the part that's real is really concealed by the part that's mental illness at this point. All right. China births. Here's some numbers. You already know that the population is a problem in China, population collapse, and also the U.S. But here's some numbers that were kind of shocking I saw today. Chinese births have gone from around 18 million a year in 2016, and that's when the one-child policy was scrapped in China, and now it's below 10 million. Just hold that in your head for a moment. When it was 18 million, they immediately stopped the program because they had a danger of destroying the country because there weren't enough births. That's at 18 million. It's at 10 million now. And they don't do immigration, do they? Do they? China doesn't do immigration except, do they? Never, right? Right. So the U.S., weirdly, has a robust immigration program, which has kept us, above the replacement level. But the U.S. has the same problem. Listen to this. About 3.7 million babies were born in the U.S. in 2022. Now, that's not much unchanged from 2021. Right? So it's not that different from 2021, just down a little. But it's down 15% from the peak in 2017. However, our population keeps growing because we're, adding a lot of immigration. Robust isn't the right word. Try virulent. Somebody's saying that I'm the only channel that YouTube has a problem with. I don't know about that. I think other people would have said it. All right. So, not enough births. Vivek Ramaswamy's making some news talking about Ukraine, and he's very clear that it's not an American priority. And what he would do as president he would freeze the borders the way they are, which would give Russia control of some stuff they didn't have before the war. And he would agree to not support NATO for Ukraine in return. And not in return, but these are things they would give Russia to stop the war, or he would. And he would ask Russia to break its ties or its military deals, not its ties, but its military deals with China. What do you think of that? Day one, Vivek becomes president. And by the way, I think Trump would do something similar. Now, Trump hasn't said the details. He just said he'd stop it on the first day by threatening both of them. But would this stop the war? Would freezing the borders Probably freezing them after Russia gets control of all the Russia territories. Because I tweeted today an opinion that says Russia's totally winning. They have all the artillery and men, and that's all you need. Basically, that's the whole story. More artillery, more men. We're done here. They're going to win. Now, maybe. I'm not sure I buy into that yet, but it's a reasonable hypothesis. And it looks like Russia has a good chance of capturing all of the Russian-speaking territories. Do you think it would be the worst thing in the world if Russia captured all of the Russia-speaking territories in Ukraine and just kept them? How would that affect you? It wouldn't affect you at all. Not only would it not affect you, you'd probably see it as the end of the war. Because there's some belief that Russia doesn't want the rest of Ukraine because it would be too hard to manage it. It's ethnically different. It's going to be a pain in the ass. But they probably could manage to control the Russian-speaking territories. I don't know. I feel like Ukraine maybe needs to lose a little bit more territory so that Russia has something to negotiate with. And then I think we're done. But I don't think it's a war anymore. Would you agree? Can I get you to agree with that? It's no longer a war. Now we're in advanced negotiations. Because it doesn't look like there's going to be any gigantic territorial change. There'll be little ones, but maybe nothing gigantic. Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, nothing is predictable there, but we'll see. Test of your intelligence. Put your intelligence hat on. That's correct. I got the right answer before I asked the question. That is correct. 25%. Do you want to hear the story? You got the answer. The answer is 25%. And the question is, what percentage of Democrats want Biden to run? 25% of Democrats want Biden to run. What are they seeing that we're not seeing? It's such a consistent number. If you're new to the channel, 25% is what I say is the percentage of Americans who get every question wrong. It's a different 25% for each question, but 25% will get every question wrong. Very consistent. All right. So the Ukraine counteroffensive has begun, or not. Because apparently if you were a Ukraine counteroffensive person, the last thing you want to talk about is the counteroffensive. It's like Fight Club. So they might be starting, but they might not be. Maybe yes, maybe no. But there is fighting, of course. And there's one theory that they're going to try to cut off the land bridge to Crimea. We'll see. Russians say they've already repelled the counteroffensive. And you believe nothing about that area, as you should. All right. Now, the most important thing I wanted to do today was, I had one story I forgot before we get to the whiteboard. Did you know there are over 90 reparation committees that have been created in the U.S. since the death of George Floyd in 2020? So apparently the death of George Floyd created calls for reparations. Do you know why there were 90 of them after George Floyd died, but maybe few or none before that? What changed it? What changed it was that after George Floyd died, you couldn't say anything to black people anymore. So criticism against anything that any black person wanted to do just went away. So everybody was like, how about reparations? And then all the white people said, I'm out. I'm out. I got nothing to say. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. So as long as you've got no pushback, and as long as white people are willing to lie to you, you can create 90 reparations committees that collectively have created not a lot of reparations. I think there was one example, wasn't there? Was it Minnesota or something? But I think there was one actual reparations that happened, but not enough people collected it. It didn't exactly work out. Yeah, some people got paid, but it was hard. I think it was difficult to prove that you were eligible, so there weren't many people taking advantage of it. You know, somebody says they know a white guy named George Floyd. Oh, that's got to be terrible. Wow. So again, I would say one of the biggest problems for black Americans is that they've trained white Americans to lie to them about anything important. Would you agree? That black people have taught white people to just lie to them. Oh yeah, reparations, totally, go do that. Like that's really going to happen. It's just nothing but lying. But if you want us to lie to you, all right, I guess we will. All right, now let me show you on the whiteboard how to identify a hoax, how to create a good hoax, and then I'm going to predict the summer hoax. Right? There's always a summer hoax for Trump. So we'll start with how to create a good hoax. Right? If it was your job to do a dirty trick and create a Trump hoax, what criteria would you use? I would use first the Tucker rule, Tucker Carlson. You remember the Tucker rule? That whatever the Democrats are doing themselves, they will blame you of. So rule number one, the hoax has to be something that Democrats are doing that's sketchy, that they're going to accuse the other side of doing. So it has to have that quality, accusing you of what they're doing. It needs to be unverifiable. The alternative to that is a video that they can clip, right? So there's two kinds of main hoaxes they use against Trump. One is the anonymous source, and the other is the anonymous source goes along with, I've seen something that you haven't seen. Oh yeah, I was in the skiff, and I saw something secret that you can't see, but oh, it's bad. Oh, it's bad, until you see it and it's not. So the unverifiable sources are good, because all summer long, the pundits can say, well, we don't know what's true, but if the reports are true, that he urinated on a hooker's bed, ho, 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 if they're true. And so all summer long, when it's slow news, you could have if it's true stories. So that's the other requirement. Now, as you know, a good hoax would play to people's biases. What do I mean by that? Well, remember when Trump was running the first time, and even when he was president, the claim against him was he was a big old racist. So the best kind of hoax would be a hoax that shows him looking racist. That's what the Fine People hoax was. So the Fine People hoax was to play to the bias. Oh, you already think he thinks this way, so we'll create a hoax by leaving out some of the video that makes him look like he was praising neo-Nazis. Of course he wasn't. If there's anybody here who still thinks that really happened, you need to do your homework. Right? There was no, he never called any neo-Nazis fine people in the real world. He said the opposite. The video was edited to make it, to reverse it. Now, likewise, do you remember when the pandemic hit and the big complaint about Trump was? What was the biggest complaint about Trump when the pandemic hit? Well, he's not a science guy, right? What's he know about science? So you need a hoax that plays to the bias that Trump doesn't know enough about science. So they did the drinking bleach hoax. Oh yeah, he recommended drinking bleach, which of course never happened. Nor did he recommend ingesting a household cleaner of any kind. That never happened. He was talking about light therapy. That was a thing. It was edited to take out the light part, and so people thought he was talking about drinking bleach. So whatever the new hoax will be, it's going to be Tucker rule, it's going to be unverifiable, or it's a video that they edit misleadingly. Could be either one. It plays to the bias, so you're already, the people who don't like Trump would already be primed to accept it, because, that's what we thought. That is exactly what we thought he was like. And here's the best one. It should be designed to remove a Trump advantage. What would be an example of that? Well, I would say that a Trump advantage would be his ability to work with Putin, wouldn't you say? Trump's ability to get along with Putin would be a Trump advantage. But you can take that away by saying that he's actually colluding with Russia. So you don't just say it didn't happen. You don't just say, oh, that's not a good idea that he could get along with Putin. You go right at it and you say, oh, it's not only a bad idea, but he's colluding with Russia. He's an actual, treasonous president. Right? So, given all these things, can you predict what the hoax will be this summer? You should, because it already started. Trump is trying to help Iran with secret documents. Israel.
Immer wenn der kleine Hunger kommt.
Ja, und dann geht er auch irgendwann wieder, ne?
Hallo? Ich bin doch gerade erst gekommen.
Unangekündigt.
Dafür habe ich ein Gastgeschenk aus cremigen Milchreis mit leckerer Zimtsoße.
Naja, wo du schon mal hier bist. Lecker.
Ja.
Dann kann ich ja jetzt...
Oder dann keine
in vielen leckeren Sorten. Alles Reis, alles Reis, alles Müller. Oder was?
Dolce Vita bedeutet, sich Zeit zu nehmen, köstliche Momente gemeinsam zu genießen. Seit 1882 sorge ich, Egidio Galbani, für frischen und saftigen Mozzarella, damit Sie jeden Tag Dolce Vita erleben können. Galbani, il gusto della Dolce Vita.
Hello everyone and welcome to round 5 of this year's Norway Chess, where all of the games that were played were incredibly interesting and a lot has happened in the world regarding the live ratings. We're gonna discuss that. I'm pretty sure you already know what I'm talking about, but let's first check out the game, as this is one of the games that's mostly responsible for the occurrence. So it's Hikaru Nakamura versus Arian Tari. I think it was even Tari's birthday, so we had 2 birthdays this tournament, Gulkash and Tari. So, he not doing all that great in the tournament. He would very much enjoy at least some points against Hikaru. Okay, maybe not winning classical, but, getting it to Armageddon would be nice. So let's check out what happened here. Hikaru has the white pieces. This is classical, and he opens with pawn to e4. Pawn to e5, and Hikaru goes for bishop to c4. Sorry about that. The so-called bishop's opening. We have knight to f6 and now pawn to d3, sort of an some sort of a parallel universe London system setup. Bishop to c5 and now knight to c3. We have pawn to c6, preparing to strike in the center. Bishop to b3 and first pawn to d6. We have pawn to h3 and Arian castles. And Hikaru now goes knight to f3. There is a game in the database from 2008. Alexander Morozevich played it against Vishwanathan Anand. He played queen to f3 and the game ended in a draw. But here knight to f3, and it is now already as of move 7 that we have a completely new game. Hikaru wants completely new territory as early on as possible. Everyone else is beating Tari, so Hikaru wants to beat him as well. And also that's one of the problems when you're not doing that great in a tournament. Maybe if you were doing great, people would be like, okay, you didn't take points away from others, we can have a draw. But if everyone else beats you and gets full 3 points, then everyone else will want to beat you as well. So that's why an offbeat approach by Hikaru, pawn to a5, and now castles. We have knight b to d7, pawn to a3, and now pawn to b5. Tari grabs more space on the queen side, bishop to a2, and now even knight to h4. Not knight to h5, a4 first, and now knight to h4. Going after this f5 square, Hikaru testing if Arian will play g6, which will prevent knight f5, but also weaken the black king side. So he doesn't. He just goes back bishop to a7. Now comes queen to f3 and knight to c5, and Hikaru just goes for it, knight to f5, and it would be too dangerous to keep this knight on f5. You have to worry about too much. It just controls too many crucial squares here. You know, some checkmating threats might also be possible. So Aryan just trades it. Bishop captures on f5, queen captures on f5, and now rook to e8. Just nicely developing. You have to be a little bit worried about this light square bishop, but as long as the knight is on f6 and there's no way to dislodge it from there, should be perfectly fine. So bishop to d2 by Hikaru, knight to e6, and now knight to e2. We have pawn to d5, striking in the center, and e captures on d5. And now a very interesting moment in the game. Tari does not capture towards the center with c captures on d5, even though I have no idea why. It seems like a perfectly fine idea where you get all the central squares. And of course, this is never an option. Queen captures, pawn is never an option because knight goes back and you lose the knight on e2. So I have no idea why Tari did not capture c captures on d5. He played knight captures on d5. And okay, your position is okay, but I mean, you don't have the full center. So at least for my level of understanding chess, that's a bit weird. Rook a to e1, and now queen to d6. Developing the queen, connecting the rooks. We have queen to g4, now with some ideas of going after the black king, and rook a to d8. We have knight to g3, now the knight can come to f5 to h5, and put even more pressure on the black king. We have knight to d4, putting pressure on the c2 pawn, and here, well, you could kick it away with c3, then knight b3, and then, okay, the light square bishop will not be as powerful. You will have to give it up for this knight at some point. Hikaru first plays bishop to g5, and now Aryan moves the rook. The critical line here is pawn to f6, as it often is. I mean, yeah, it's either good or it's not. But the problem is it kind of opens up this diagonal. And here you might run into something like knight to e4, attacks the queen. And once the queen moves, because you really want to keep an eye on that f6 pawn, you will capture. F captures, bishop captures on f6, queen captures on g4, h captures, g captures, and now even knight captures on f6 because the knight cannot move. And after king f7, you will grab the rook here, captures, or rook captures, and okay, you will have two knights for the rook. It's a pretty it's definitely a trade-off. It's hard to say who would have the advantage here. Two knights, of course, are scary, but the black king is wide in the open. Once the position opens up, those two rooks will be incredibly powerful, especially, you know, complemented by the bishop on this long diagonal. So instead, rook to b8 by Tari, and now bishop back to e3 by Hikaru. Also, you need to counter this bishop. It's a magnificent piece. Queen to g6, offering a queen trade, and just pawn to c3, kicking away the knight. Knight captures on e3 first, f captures on e3, and now knight to b3. And now knight to e4. It's an excellent square for the knight. You can bring it to d6, you can bring it over to f5. Queen captures on g4, h captures on g4, and now you should play something like rook b to d8 and put pressure on the backwards d3 pawn. But Tari played pawn to c5, and this makes it very, very hard for him to play the game. What he did with the c5 move is that he basically locked his own dark square bishop out of the game. How are you getting this dark square bishop out of the game? You will have to play something like maybe here, 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 here. But even if you get it to e7, the knight here just controlling all of these squares is gonna be a bad piece. So Hikaru fully takes advantage of this. He plays bishop captures on b3, a captures, and now c4, just keeping the pawn on c5. That's how he locks it in. Capturing does absolutely nothing. The bishop is still out of the game. So Tari instead goes rook to d8, goes after the rook e to d8, for those of you who are maybe just listening, not watching. Rook to d1, and now rook to d7. And now king to f2. Hikaru gets the king into the game, of course, ready to meet rook b to d8 with king to e2, guarding the d3 pawn. So h5, Tari wants to gain control over the f5 square, so if Hikaru captures, he can push f5, but Hikaru says that's perfectly fine. You just push that f5 pawn, because my knight is then coming to c3 and then to d5. And you know what this means, of course. F5, knight to c3. Now Hikaru's knight is coming to d5, or even to b5 if possible. But the thing is, both of those are light squares, and you have a dark square bishop, you have the two rooks, so either that knight is staying on that light square for the rest of the game, or you will at some point have to give up the exchange. to trade. So pawn to b4 attacks the knight, knight to b5 now, puts pressure on the bishop on a7, and now pawn to f4 by Tari. And this further advances Hikaru's advantage. Here you should probably play b captures on a3, and after knight captures, just keep the bishop safe and keep the position closed. But it's still very, very hard to play this. The knight will again be remaneuvered over to c3, then to d5, and it will just be a monster there. So instead, Tari played pawn to f4. Now Hikaru plays a captures on b4, bishop to b6, and now e captures on f4. We have c captures on b4, and now king to f3. We have e captures on f4, and now the only move in the position that gives white the advantage, pawn to d4, of course. The knight here guards the d4 pawn, also the rook here, and now you will just start advancing those pawns. Rook b to d8, Tari doubles up on the d file, but now not d5, the move you were expecting, because here you will never be able to push further, and also c5 will never be an option. So the idea will be to push c5, not d5, and Hikaru plays rook to d3. Just shows that this is never a threat, because if you capture, then Hikaru will just double up on the d file and you lose material here. And of course, if rook captures, then just knight wins material. So rook to c8, and it's Zugzwang. There's no move here that Tari can make. You can't really do any moves with the king. You can't do anything with the bishop. If the rook moves away from the d file, then you're just going to capture the b3 pawn. So there's really nothing here. He tried rook to c8, kind of going after the c4 pawn, but Hikaru was waiting for just that. Rook to c1, and now rook to d5. If you now repeat rook c to d8, then c5 comes, and it's game over. Bishop to a7, let's say c6 attacks the rook, rook moves anywhere, c7 cuts off the rook from the defense of the bishop. Next move, you're going to capture the bishop. So, yeah, I mean, or the rook, or promote, or, the rig, depends on what black plays. But here, rook to d5 was played. This is a sort of a last resort move for Tari, saying that if capture, I'm going to capture on c1. And even this is winning for Hikaru, but Hikaru doesn't play that. Hikaru plays pawn to c5, rook to g5 now, going after rook to g3 check. But now we've reached move 40, but Tari's position is completely lost. Feel free to pause the video and try to find the absolute best move for Hikaru while I give you a couple of seconds. I just realized my laundry basket was in the back when I checked the camera, so sorry about that. But what are you gonna do? You have to do your laundry. If you were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this very nice idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is knight to d6. That's the good stuff. Just going after the rook, the bishop still hanging, and there's no good way to handle this. Even if you go for rook to g3 check, and let's say a king to e4, you could capture on d3. It's not a problem. King captures, you still have all the same problems, and there's no playing this. What are you going to play? Bishop to a7, then just knight captures on c8. If you don't, then you're going to lose the bishop, and you don't even care about rook captures on c1 because the pawn will promote. And it's sort of what happened in the game. After rook to g5, knight to d6, rook to c6 was played, saying, okay, maybe Hikaru doesn't see it, but he is the master of the puzzle rush. So of course he spots it in an instant, and he already saw it like 10 moves ago, so it's not a problem. C captures on b6 was played, and he was in this position on move 42 that Arian Tari resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So beautifully done by Hikaru. Of course, if the rook is captured, just pawn to c7 promotes to a queen. There is no way of stopping this. There are no tricks here, like rook to g3 check, king to e4, rook to e1 check can be played, king to f5, king to d5, you don't really care. No more checks in the position. Next move you promote, and that's it. The knight covers d8, so e8, so that's out of the question. So yeah, here he resigned. Once again, congratulations if you were able to find this puzzle. And yeah, what does this mean for the tournament standings, for the live ratings? Let's check it out. So now Fabi is still in the lead, because we said in the previous round that he was so far ahead of everyone that even if he lost the next classical game and Hikaru won, he would still be leading the tournament. So even though Hikaru doing extremely well, if Fabiano continues playing well, it will be his tournament. We have Fabiano.
Was ist besser als Effizienzklasse A? A minus 30% Energieverbrauch. Das neue Modell der iPro-Serie 7 Plus. Denn die grünste Energie ist die, die wir gar nicht erst verbrauchen. Haier, waschen neu definiert.
Manchmal sind es die kleinen Routinen, die einen großen Unterschied machen. Cliff Bar Minis, der ultimative Snack.
Hello everyone and welcome to another very impressive game from round 5 of this year's Norway Chess, also classical time format. Fabiano Caruana, who's been leading the tournament, well, with such a lead, even if he loses today's round, it does not matter. He will still remain in the lead. His opponent is the former 2800 player Shahriar Mamedyarov, and this game is immaculate. You guys will see what I mean by this. And for those of you wondering, I've seen this question being posted in a couple of my videos. These are the highest ratings ever achieved in chess. So there you have it. Magnus Carlsen, highest rating was achieved in 2014, 2889. So he actually almost reached 2900. Fabi also, as you can see, was 2851 also in 2014. Seems like a lot of players just had their peak ratings in 2014, but 800 player. Wesley was also a Grisho rating of 20. A lot of discussion of 5, and now knight to c3. As usual, we will have the 4 knights of the English: knight to f6, knight f3, knight to c6, and pawn to e4. The Nimzovich variation of the 4 knights of the English: bishop to c5, and now knight captures on e5. So this is all very standard stuff. We've seen it. Knight captures, pawn to d4, attacks the bishop and the knight, bishop to b4, and now d captures on e5. We have knight captures on e4 and queen to f3. And now knight captures on c3 is the most popular move here, but Shah goes for pawn to d5. And okay, Fabio of course knows theory: bishop to e2. We have pawn to d4 attacking the pinned piece, but this also loses the knight on e4. So queen captures on e4, d captures on c3, and both players castle to safety. So castles, pawn to a3, chases away the bishop, but first a nice Zwischenzug, c captures on b2, bishop captures, and bishop to c5. And here there is a game where rook f to d1 was played, but Fabi plays bishop to d3, and as bishop to d3 is the top move recommended by the engine, we can pretty safely say that Fabi was not thrown out of his comfort zone or, surprised in the opening by Shah in this game. And of course, as of move 14, we have a completely new game. So Mamedyarov is definitely playing with fire here, allowing Fabi this beautiful bishop pair to be pointed like this at the black king. And you don't really have options here. Your only move is g6. Other than this, you're getting checkmated. So g6, and Fabi goes for it. Pawn to e6. Looks like a pawn sacrifice in order to free up the dark square bishop's diagonal, but you can't really capture this pawn. For example, if bishop captures queen e5 and you're getting checkmated, you can't play f6 because queen captures on e6, and f captures on e6 isn't much better. I mean, still queen to e5, and if queen to e7, okay, guarding against checkmate, you allow all sort of nasty checks here. Now queen captures on h7 with check king to e8, and now bishop captures on g6. You are getting absolutely destroyed here. So instead, after e6, just queen to e7 by Mamedyarov, and now f captures. Rook f to e1, adding more firepower to the e file. We have pawn to a5, not really worried about anything here, and queen to f4. We have pawn to f6. Now no longer you have to worry about all the tension here. And okay, a couple of moves ago, yes, instead of rook f to e1, let's say maybe you were thinking queen to e5, why not go for checkmate? Because then f6 just solves everything. So that's the reason why it wasn't played. So here queen f4, f6. Now bishop to e4, putting pressure on this diagonal, not allowing b6 and bishop to b7, because of course Mamedyarov would also enjoy putting his bishops there. Rook to a6. Now attacking the e6 square 3 times, and you will win that pawn eventually. And you could consider something like bishop to d5. Sure, it's definitely an idea, but Fabi goes for rook a to d1, and now rook to d6. Capturing, of course, you can do this. Bishop captures on e6, but it's going to be very tricky. Bishop captures on b7, attacks the rook here. Rook b6 attacks both of the bishops here. Now bishop to d5 puts pressure on the e6 bishop, and now queen f7. And look at this. Bishop to d4, saving your bishop there. You will play bishop captures on d4, rook captures on d4, and now bishop captures on d5. Rook captures on d5, and it's a perfectly fine position for both. Okay, Shah's king is a bit, more loose here with the f and g pawn being pushed forward, but should be perfectly fine. Instead, rook to d6 was played, and now we have a trade. Rook captures on d6, bishop captures on d6, attacks the queen, and Fabi moves it to h4. we have pawn to c6, now stopping bishop to d5, and here we have bishop to d3 by Fabi, defending the pawn on e6. The crucial move to consider here was queen to h6. This prevents bishop captures on a3 because it's very hard to actually defend that pawn, because if you go after it now, then you get destroyed. Just bishop captures on a3, queen captures, and now this pawn to e7 move. Sorry about that. It seems the mailman is here. I'll just do. Yeah, so if e7, rook to e8 would be played, and then this bishop captures on g6 is just winning in pretty much all of the lines. If now rook captures on e7, how do you defend here? I mean, you're going to get checkmated if rook captures on e7. There's even bishop captures on h7 with check. And now if rook captures, queen to g6 with check, and now after rook to g7, it's just game over. Rook to e8, you have to block with the queen. Only move, and after queen to f8, you're just going to capture. Rook captures, king captures, queen captures on f6, and of course the queen will beat the bishop and the rook. So that's that. The thing is, after queen to h6, you will be able to play queen to g7, and that's, well, could be one of the reasons why Fabi decided against this queen to h6 idea altogether. Now, you for example, if you go back, then Shah can also go back. If you repeat queen h6, you might even play something like bishop to e5, even allow the doubling here, or not the doubling, but the messing up of the pawn structure in front of the black king. For example, h4, queen g7, queen back to e3, queen f6, you know, you will capture on e6 next. It's perfectly fine for both white and black. But here Fabi played bishop to d3, and now Shah just captures the pawn. Bishop captures on a3, bishop captures, queen captures, and now he asks Fabi, what are you planning next? Queen to g3. Fabi prepares bishop captures on g6 if it will be possible, but Mamedov just allows it. He didn't play pawn to f5. Pawn to f5 seems like such a nice move. I mean, you make the light square bishop useless, and you don't care. There's no dark square bishop, so you won't get any problems along this diagonal, and it's hard to say why he decided against it. But he played rook to e8, and he basically invites Fabi to play bishop captures on g6, because now, especially with the rook not guarding f7, it's just a move you have to play. Just bishop captures on g6 check, and of course you if you trade queens right away, then you throw in a nice bishop to f7 check first. So rook captures on e6. This was Mamedov's idea. Or of course, if you capture, then just queen captures on g6 and you get checkmated. That doesn't really matter what you do. If you go king to f8, then queen to f7 with check. If you go to h8, then you lose the rook with check, and then again you get checkmated. So instead, rook captures on e6. Bishop back to d3, opening up a discovery to the black king and also not allowing the trade to happen. King to h8, and now rook to d1. And all of a sudden, Fabi's position just became a little bit passive. He's down material. Okay, on the plus side, he did open up the black king, but will he be able to attack the black king? So here we have rook to d6, queen to d6, offering a queen trade, and now queen to f3, of course, avoiding the trade. And now, how do you continue here? Queen to e7, of course, going for rook to e1 check, bishop to f1, not allowing it to come with check, and now rook to e1 would be pointless. You would just capture, and after the queen captures, you play queen captures on f6, and you have at least a perpetual. So rook to e5 instead. We have pawn to h4, creating some breathing room for the white king. Bishop to e6, and now rook to d4. A nice rook lift, preparing to get the rook into the action. Also defending the c4 pawn. Now comes rook to e1. And now, well, Fabi does not have all that many playable moves. Queen to d3 is one idea that you might consider, going for rook to d8 check, also being able to play queen to d2. Fabi decides to go for queen to c3. He attacks the rook on e1 and